Hey everybody, welcome to the final Q&A of 2020. Or I guess depending on when this goes live, it might be the first Q&A of 2021. I don't know, I'm recording it Thursday night. I figured I would do it now just to make sure that it was out tomorrow because I have a whole bunch of other stuff scheduled, some of which you might see me on. So I just figured I would jump in right now. So Happy New Year to everybody, and let's check out what the Q&As are this week. First up, Jesse Brown looks like they're having trouble trying to figure out sync. Don't worry, Jesse. Everybody does it first, and the more you know, the more confusing it might actually get. They're trying to run their systems through an Extron switch. The only systems that work are the NES and Super Nintendo, and everything else goes crazy through the Extron switcher. Can anybody please explain why this happens or how to fix it? The PS2 and Genesis, for example, work perfectly hooked up directly to the monitor, but when running through the Extron, it loses sync. I actually bought two of them just to rule out that it's broke. I have multiple switches, multiple cables, different brands, nothing works. So what you're running into is that the Extron switch is one of the few devices that are still used pretty widely in the retro gaming world that will only accept a certain type of sync signal. So your PS2 probably uses sync on Luma or sync on Composite, and that is pretty much the only case where you would want to buy one of those cables that has a sync stripper in the head. As far as why your Genesis cable isn't working, there could be a bunch of different reasons for that. If you open up the SCART head and there's a resistor on the sync line, you could try removing that. However, I just want to be clear that now you're sending a lot of voltage, which would be fine for the Extron, but really bad for everything else. So you might want to look into different options. Or I guess maybe look into what cable you purchased for the Genesis. Most would be just using C-Sync because that's available on all of the models of the Genesis, but it's possible you got a cable that's synced on composite video, so I would just check that out. Retro Access seems to be taking a break for a while. I think they're coming back within a few weeks, but you might also want to contact them when their store reopens and ask about a direct BNC solution for the Genesis, because while they're kind of expensive, they sell really nice console to BNC cables that are designed exactly for the Extron. So I imagine they must have been running into this problem as well. But one of these days, I'll try to do a video on sync, and I'll try to break it up into like super basic, here's how you get started, here's a little bit more once you get comfortable with that, and then here's to the extent of my knowledge where stuff gets weird. But I got a whole bunch of other stuff I got to get to first, so keep the questions coming if you have any problems with it. But I think the overall issue is just that those Extron devices require pure C-Sync, not composite video as sync, not Luma as sync, and it has to probably be a specific voltage as well. Colin Kenny has an excellent question. Since I'm now releasing the Q&As concurrently on YouTube, is it any additional work to have it part of your podcast feed? If it isn't, is that something that you would do? I totally don't want to make extra work for you, so say if it's a pain. It's not a pain as far as the work that it takes to do it. However, there's some logistical things and some changes that have been in the works for well over a year now that got delayed for some very obvious reasons and some behind the scenes stuff that I'm just working out. So I've said this a million times before that within a few weeks I hope to solve this, and it keeps getting pushed back. And part of it is just fear. Like this, the channel's doing okay, the website's doing okay, the podcast is doing okay, and I'm always just afraid if I make one change, is it going to hurt anything somehow? And it would be algorithm based too. It wouldn't really be anything else. But I'm working on figuring out ways to do all of this stuff, and I'm hoping to have something worked out in a reasonable period of time. But expect something soon. And just to let you know, if you'd like it audio only, I make sure that an MP3 is available for direct download or direct streaming, and I compress all of the MP3s to 128K mono because you don't really need to hear me crystal clear in stereo. So if you do want to just listen on your phone, you should be able to click on it, and it should be a reasonably small download. Certainly nothing that'll spike your usage if you don't have unlimited or anything like that. So while I would love to have already had that turned on a year ago, the short-term solution, if you want to listen to audio only, is just download the MP3. And it will be on some podcast network at some point in the future. I just need to figure out the logistics. Oliver Clare says, are there any situations in which plugging analog consoles directly into a flat screen is a good idea? I don't own a FrameMeister, but I'm just wondering if the presence or lack of SCART component and composite ports should be a consideration for retro gamers in choosing a modern flat screen, or would input lag and number of HDMI ports be more important? My answer is going to be said with 99% certainty. I don't like to say 100% unless I really am, unless I'd put my life on the line, if you will. But with 99% certainty, I could say that I would skip all analog inputs from all flat panel TVs, unless it's putting in a DVD player or a VCR or something like that. And even then, if you have access to certain types of scalers, I would also skip what's built into TVs, because they're really just put in there just to appease the people that say, hey, I still have 200 VHS tapes and 1,000 DVDs, and I don't want to rebuy all that stuff, again, and I don't want to rebuy another player. Let me just plug it in and be done, which, from that perspective, the analog inputs absolutely accomplish that. But the more I started testing analog inputs of flat panels, the more I realized they always tend to add more lag. And they very often process analog signals from game consoles either wrong or not at all. So it would be my strong suggestion to say that in 99% of cases, especially with new TVs, all I would care about is input lag, and maybe not even number of HDMI ports if you found a good switch that works for you or something like that. So for me, really, if you're looking for a gaming flat panel, my number one thing to look at would be lag, and the next would be all of the stuff that you have to worry about with all flat panels: motion blur, pixel response time, all that stuff. And you do get what you pay for. If you buy a $220 TV, you could probably get one with like a quarter of a frame of lag, which is pretty darn close to zero. But it might be a little bit blurry on side-scrolling games and stuff like that. But, on the other hand, if you're spending $220 on a flat panel that still looks good and works with retro gaming consoles, that's kind of a win no matter how you look at it, especially with low lag like that. So just the short answer to your question, I would just care about lag and the panel itself, and I wouldn't worry about analog inputs at all. Bradley wants to know if I have any plans to do more beginner-friendly videos. Often I try to point people to the website, but getting someone to read is difficult. I thought your video on the RetroTink 2X Mini and the OSSC getting started videos were great. There are so many people out there who enjoy retro consoles, who need the right information, but often when I point them to your website, they don't bother to read it, but instead find the first video with good production on YouTube and treat that as gospel. So that question stings for a million reasons, because you're 100% right. And yes, I absolutely am working on a Getting Started series, and it's the same one that I've been talking about for like a year and a half now. So I'm starting to feel like Brian from Family Guy with that novel that's totally almost done. But the truth is, at first I delayed it because I ended up getting sick and then needed to catch up with all the work that I had to put aside when I couldn't really do it. And then I wanted to wait to get good production equipment to try to make some of the B-roll scenes a little bit more easy to understand, because I always try to keep into account people that want to watch and listen whose first language isn't English, or of course people that are just more visual learners than audio learners. So I didn't want to do it twice. I felt like if I made a giant deal about a Getting Started series, that I would have to really get it right the first time, because if I kept doing a new one every year, people would probably be like, oh, I already saw that, not realizing it's the newer one or something like that, which are all pretty lame excuses, right? But I think as soon as there's a few deadlines coming up of products with release dates, products that I truly believe in, not just like, oh, hey, I get to review a new product, like stuff that I really think is needed in the retro gaming world. So I got to get those reviews out for the launch date for those, because I really stand behind them. And even though I don't make them and I don't sell them or make any money from them, they're products that I think are awesome. So my goal is to catch up with the videos that are already mostly shot. There's one that's hopefully releasing this weekend that's going to be a bit of a doozy. I still have the downscaling video, which I stopped on that because I really needed to spend like a whole day researching a whole other avenue of it. So I might put that on hold, indefinitely until after the Getting Started series. Depending on my workflow, I might get to that. But basically, after I get caught up in the next probably month, I was going to say a few weeks, but probably month, I'm going to really start on that. The only other problem too is that once I start, it's probably going to take a full month to make these, and then I would release them probably one a week as they were done. but that would mean that I have no extra videos out for a month, and I don't know how that is going to affect the algorithm or anything else. So I would like to think that supporters would totally understand, and in fact most of you probably will, like, oh, it makes sense, bigger production, longer videos take more time, but the algorithm doesn't understand those things. So it's always terrifying battling an invisible thing that doesn't really exist, that no one prints any information on. But it is what it is. Unfortunately, the website's going to be there forever, but the videos are what draw a lot of people in. And to the point you made, a lot of people get started through videos. So I got to just keep up with all of it. So I apologize for a 3-minute rant and dumb excuses of why I haven't done it yet. The quick answer to your question is, I'm also frustrated by all of the stuff that's out there that's wrong information or outdated information, but people treat it like it's gospel because it's a well-produced video. And so because of that and all the positive reasons, I am going to be working on it, and definitely before the end of 2021, but I really hope for sooner rather than later. And I hope it really does do a good job pointing people in the right direction. And in fact, videos like the 2X Mini really changed my approach on how I'm going to talk about this, because people reacted to that video and a few others pretty well. And I also want to redo the RGB guide and the Getting Started page on the website to reflect all of this. So that way you could watch this video series, then go to the website and then know exactly what you're looking at. So it's not just a bunch of terms you don't understand. You're kind of already ready to go and know what to click on. So good question. Sorry for the lame answer, but the short answer, soon. Jared Brown was trying to find the Atari 7800 BIOS that's compatible with the analog NT Mini Noir. I don't have one to test, and I have a folder filled with a long list of BIOSes for every console. And the last time I had an NT Mini, I was able to just go in and basically try every one that I had, which I genuinely don't even remember where I got them from. I've just been keeping a folder on my computer where I just dump all this stuff in as I find it over the years. And I eventually found one that worked. You just have to make sure that it's labeled exactly what it's supposed to be labeled, which should be in the documentation, and that it's placed in the exact folder that it needs to be, and that it's not zipped. And even with the labeling, it has to have the correct extension. So I do remember a couple of times in all sorts of emulation, FPGA, software emulation, it required a BIOS file, but it was looking for something like, let's just say, a .bin. And the file that I downloaded was a .bios or something. So you do have to make sure that the full name of the file should match. So hopefully that's enough information to point you in the right direction, not just for the NT Mini Noir, but anytime you need to use a BIOS file to run some kind of emulation. Dave Phipps wants to know, what is a good wireless controller to use with the C64 Mini and Maxi? So I'm assuming you mean the newer Commodore 64s that use USB-based controllers if you would like to use them. If not, then I'm sorry, and I'm going to get this answer all wrong. But basically, if your question is just looking for a good wireless USB controller, I would first go to Mr. Addon's Twitter page where he links the spreadsheet that has all of the lag data, and I would try to find a wireless USB controller that's lower lag, and then I would try to research to see if it's compatible with the device that you want to use it. So while I don't know anything about those Commodore 64 minis, that's kind of more of a general advice on what to do, and kind of a cop-out answer. Sorry. Jason Guffey had a pretty lengthy question. I read every word of it, and I'm going to answer. I hope I'll get to every answer for it, but I'm just going to skip reading it out loud just for the interest of everybody listening. But basically, Jason has a couple of different processors that they want to make sure links properly to get the best video out of it. So they got a DVDO VP50 and like how it looks on the PS2, but also want to use it through an M Classic to smooth out the edges, which might actually be a really good use for the M Classic. Jason found that sending it through the VP50, so 1080i from the PlayStation 2 into the VP50 out as 1080p adds some jagged edges. So Jason found that actually sending 480p out of the VP50, so you're essentially just using it to deinterlace, and then letting the M Classic scale seems to work the best. That seems totally fine. That seems like an excellent solution. Now, it looks like Jason's also trying to mess with the GBS scaler to see how that works in the context of all of this. So you could scale it through the VP50, the GBS, and the M Classic, which is stuff that I've tested before, but I wouldn't really mess with it. I would let the PlayStation 2 go into the VP50, into the M Classic, you'll end up with less lag than the FrameMeister even, actually, and a very, very good signal. And you could use that VP50 for a whole bunch of other stuff as well. So it's certainly not a bad purchase, especially if you're a fan of DVDs or any other 480i content. Now, it does get a little tricky. So you talk about 240p support. The VP50 that I have does sort of work with 240p, but it adds a ton of lag because I think it's confused as to what the signal actually is, and it didn't look that great. So I would absolutely say it's worth either getting another OSSC or getting your OSSC repaired. The very good news is, though, if for whatever reason your TV is not compatible, which most are these days, you could actually run the OSSC through the DVDO and have less than a frame of lag and have it be compatible in all modes, including 1080p 5X. I'm pretty sure. And the DVDO also does scaling in a different way. So you could actually put 1080p 4X in and then scale the image up to fit the screen top to bottom, and it should look okay. Certainly better than using any of your TV's stretching or anything like that. Lastly, the question is involving the sound. It looks like Jason's having a problem route the audio through the HDMI, and I believe there were settings in the menu, and all the menu in the DVDO stuff is pretty crappy, to be honest with you, but it's really confusing. Stuff's labeled weird, like cadence support and stuff like that. They should have just said low lag mode, but I would absolutely check that, and I would just make sure that you could link one to the other. There's so many inputs and outputs of that thing. I can't imagine it not having some kind of audio encoder, but to be honest, every time I've used it in the context of what I needed to use it for, I was actually splitting audio anyway. So I know that might sound weird, but I actually did end up putting like component inputs into that and use optical directly into my audio receiver and kind of skip all this stuff. So I would absolutely try to download a manual, read through the menus, and just kind of play around. And of course, just mark down any changes you make, because I haven't gone deep into the settings, but I imagine there's some things you could change that would mess it up, and you'd probably have to do a factory reset or something like that. So I think I summed up all your questions. Please clarify if I missed anything, but I did read the whole thing, and they're good questions, and that's a good scaler too. So while it might take you a little longer to try to figure out the best workflow for all of your consoles and audio and all that stuff, it's a pretty decent investment, and you should be able to use it for a bunch of other things. Patrick Working just got a new flat panel TV, and they're looking for conversion options for their VCR's composite output. Looks like they've tried a RetroTink 2X Pro in pass-through mode, as well as their TV's direct composite input. However, both have problems. The TV keeps switching between 4:3 and 16:9, regardless of whatever the setting is, and the RetroTink has some dropouts. So, that kind of sounds like there's something going on with your VCR. And remember, while I'm certainly not an expert in VCRs, all old components like this have capacitors on them, and capacitors are eventually all going to dry up and die. So right off the bat, there's a very plausible reason why your VCR might have issues. There's a million others as well. But so my first thought is your VCR. However, you also mentioned possibly picking up one of those cheap composite to HDMI converters on Amazon and eBay. And it's kind of funny because I always tell people stay away from those, don't ever use them, they're terrible, but that's always in the context of gaming. If you're talking about video signals, that's exactly what they're designed for, and they actually do a pretty decent job. I mean, they treat 480i as 480i, so they are pretty decent, and they're inexpensive. And in my opinion, if you're a tinkerer with stuff like this, having something like that as a tool in your toolbox is actually a pretty cool investment, because I think they're only like $20. So I would absolutely try that next. Even if you don't end up using it in the long run, it's something that's cool to have. And if you get dropouts with that, then it's time to look into another VHS player. If that works, heck, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And if you wanted to go a little crazy, you could get one of the DVDO scalers we were just talking about. But just remember, what comes in has to be processed, however, in whatever condition it's in. So putting a 480i video game or a 480i digitally encoded DVD is going to look different when you scale it than an analog encoded VHS tape or a laser disc. So if you're super into your VCR collection, you might actually want to just look into a really nice condition consumer grade TV. But for a million reasons, you probably might want to stick with a flat panel. So in that order, that's my suggestions. Try that cheap adapter just because. Don't ever use it for games. And then if that doesn't work, just try any other VCR. Go to a Goodwill if those are even still open, whatever. Pick up a $10 VCR and just test and see what happens. And if you want recommendations for really high-end VHS players, there's definitely sites out there. There's a Sony model with a Ferrugia processor in it that's been highly recommended that I own, that it kind of softens the image, but almost in a good way. Because remember, video signals, you'd kind of benefit from a softening, whereas old school video games benefit from a sharpening. And there's also a JVC player that is also outputs S-video, which really sharpens it up. And it's the least noise I've seen out of a VHS player on the tapes that I used. I only tested a handful. So there's other websites out there that are really well versed in different VHS models, but those are the two that I kind of remembered that you might want to look into if you want a high-end one. But to be honest, a really good early 2000s, cheapo model VCR would probably be more than good enough in most cases. Mark Main has a PlayStation 1 connected through RGB SCART and wanted to play light gun games. Would the PS2 AV multi-out pass-through thing work? So I believe you're talking about a device that almost looks like a Rad2X type of thing, but you plug it into your PlayStation. It actually has an AV multi-out on the other side, and it breaks out composite and I think at least stereo audio, maybe even S-video. And yeah, that would work absolutely perfect. I would get whatever's cheaper. So you could pick up one of those, or you could go to, I think Retro Gaming Cables and Retro Access both have versions of the PlayStation cable that break out composite video for this exact reason. I would suggest just getting a Sync-On Luma and then having them break out composite just because it should be easier. Either way should be totally safe, and that should work. Now, you also said, the PS2 RGB SCART is Sync-On Green. Wasn't sure if that would mess it up. That only has to do with 480p signals, and I don't know of any PlayStation 2 game that's a light gun game that also works in 480p. Dreamcast, yes, but not PlayStation. So that should not be an issue at all. So yeah, I would pick whatever's cheaper. I would either try to find that adapter on eBay, or I would just get another cable that has composite video broken out, and it should be a perfect solution. Goodnight was following up from the question from the other week and said that their HDMI splitter turned out to be bad, and getting a new one fixed all the major dropout issues they were having for long periods. So that makes sense. I had an OSSC and a Switch that did not get along at all. I think the Switch was actually fine, but did not like the OSSC, so that's a good and cheap solution. However, it got Goodnight curious, since their capture card still takes a second or two to adjust to the signal going in and out, and they were wondering if direct analog capture is a better solution in this regard. So no, because you'd still have the dropout problem, and no, because you would still have to manually set all of the timings. And the only capture card I know of that does that easily is the DataPath Vision, which is internal only, which that might not be a problem. And there are still certain scenarios, like with Genesis and 32X, that even going direct, you would need to use oversampling. It just gets complicated, whereas finding a capture card that can read the OSSC's signal is much cheaper and much easier overall, and you just don't even have to worry about anything. And you could even just use the OSSC in generic mode, which will look fine, whereas just plugging analog into these without doing any tweaking at all will probably look far worse. It's depending on the capture card, it might actually just look bad, whereas the OSSC in generic mode through a capture card is going to look totally fine, just might not look as perfect as if you dialed in the timings. So I feel like both for price and ease of use and all of that stuff, I think to answer the last part of your question, what's the ideal or dream setup for the Genesis or retro capture in general? Definitely the open source scan converter into a device that can handle the signals. And luckily, because you're streaming or capturing, even if for whatever reason your capture card is only compatible in 480p mode, or will only do uncompressed video or uncompressed color space in 480p or something like that, you could still just use OBS points scaling I think it's point or area, either one. I mean, you can get an integer scale, so it's essentially the exact same thing, and you're still getting the digital output and all that stuff. So that's what I would suggest at the moment. Open source scan converter, a capture card that's compatible. Hopefully we'll get some cool new capture solutions in 2021. Check out Epos Fox's channel if you want to be kept up to date with all of the things in real time. He's usually really good about making sure to check out all like the latest and greatest capture solutions. And he even tests the OSSC in his videos, which the entire retro gaming world is super appreciative of. So that's always cool. But yeah, good question. I would just stick with the OSSC. Sean Richmond wanted to know if using wired controller extension cables add any lag. They're currently going through wireless controllers at the moment, but they also want an alternative if they ever choose to use their original controllers. That is an excellent question, and there's a but. However, just using a controller adapter is going to add zero measurable lag. And in fact, it's at the point where somebody on a forum calculated it once just for the hell of it, just to see. But it was something like 1,000 feet before it was even at a millisecond. And it might have even been less than that. It's an incredible length that you would have to go through in order for it to affect your gaming experience at all. So a 6-foot or a 12-foot controller extension cable will add zero lag. But the problems there are problems with those, in that if you get a cheaper brand, or sometimes the brands that are decent, but like every once in a while there's just a crappy one in the bin, I've seen them lose connection. I've seen them, even though they're solid and they feel like they're stuck in, sometimes your button presses don't register, and it's not because of the length, it's just because of the quality of the connector and stuff like that. So I would look around. If Console 5 stocks them, Luke is really good about not stocking junk. Or, sometimes he does have really cheap, like, SCART cables, but he puts right on the ad, like, these are unshielded cables, use them for testing. Like, Luke's very honest about all that stuff. So I would try Console 5 first. If they have something, generally it's going to be of good quality. And then my next suggestion would be the cheapest. So I'm sure there's some stuff on AliExpress, but you might not want to wait the 6 months shipping. So Amazon, eBay, whatever else that's kind of in your area, and just try it. And even if it doesn't work, throw it in a bin somewhere, put a label on it, like put some masking tape on it and write, loses connection or something, because you never know what project's coming up where you might actually need one of those things. But those are my two suggestions. Try to get one from Console 5 that's been tested, or ask around if you know other people that have bought them that have good luck with them. And then if not, just buy the absolute cheapest and give it a try. Play a fun action game where, play like a fighting game or a racing game where if you play for 20 minutes and end up crashing because the adapter comes loose, it's not the end of the world. Don't go through like your awesome Metroidvania game where you've put hours into it and you don't want to screw up the ending. Like, stick with a lighthearted game, try it out, and if it works for you, awesome. And another thing is you could always just use masking tape to connect the two, and just kind of wrap it around. And I actually use painter's tape all the time because it doesn't leave a residue. So if you find something that works, you could kind of like tape it all up, and then if you ever don't want it anymore, you could take it off and just use like a basic cloth to get any residue off. So good question, but nope. Controller adapters should be perfectly safe from a lag point of view, as long as the connector doesn't wiggle around and lose connections. Chaos Koopa says they're looking to play both their GameCube and Wii on an HD TV without having to mod. What's the best solution for hooking both of these systems up to a modern display? I don't own any component cables, but I'm willing to buy them depending on your recommendation. I'm looking for the most cost-effective solution without sacrificing too much quality compared to the mods like the Wii Dual. Should I get something like the GC HD Mark II or Carby for the GameCube, and then look for a decent component video splitter and a component to HDMI converter for the Wii? Or is there some all-encompassing solution for both? Basically, what do you do with these two systems? So luckily for you, there's an incredibly easy answer for all of this. If your Wii is backward compatible and you want a cost-effective solution, start with that. Get the HD Retrovision Wii cables, which I think are coming back in stock or are already in stock. And those are just pass-through cables, but they're of the highest quality. and then go to the Amazon store that I link in this description and get the component to HDMI converter that's in there. The ones that I link to have the chips that convert all of the signals properly. And while some, OCD experts might find some differences, maybe you get a little bit of crushed blacks, or sometimes you get some interference. Overall, for the price, the $20, you're going to be very, very happy with the results, unless you're doing like zoom in 1,000 times side-by-side comparisons. All digital is always going to be the best solution, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with shielded cables and a decent analog to digital converter. 99% of the time, that's going to be more than enough. And that's all you need to start. If you eventually want to use your actual GameCube, I would definitely get the Carby. It's just the most cost-effective solution. They're all GC video solutions, so they're all going to pretty much look the same. And it's the cheapest of the really well-built ones that are out there. So I would absolutely recommend that, and just an HDMI cable, and that's a very easy one. So I would start with the Wii, especially if it's backward compatible. That way you have both at your disposal, and that might actually be a pretty interesting thing as well. So if you use the Wii through this converter for a while, playing both GameCube and Wii games, and then if you switch over to the Carby, are you going to notice the difference between true digital and analog to digital? Would your eyes pick that up? If so, what is it? Is it the model of the Wii? Is it the converter? And, these are all just super nerd things that you don't need to care about at all. I'm just saying, if you happen to be a crazy nerd like me, those other things and experiments you could do as well. But if you just want to play, all you got to do is get the good shielded component video cables. If you get unshielded, it's going to look like crap. And then get any decent analog to digital converter, and then just the Carby. And it's about as cheap as you can get. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks so much to everybody that participates in these. Thanks to all of the newcomers that have just signed up, and thanks to everybody that's been here for a very long time. I appreciate absolutely all of you. You've certainly made 2020 a hell of a lot more bearable, and these Q&As have always been a lot of fun that always put a smile on my face. So thank all of you so much, and here's to seeing you in 2021. And I promise you, regardless of what the heck else happens in the world, there are some really awesome things coming out in the retro gaming world that everybody's going to get excited about. Not everybody will feel like they need to run out and buy them, but everybody will at least be excited, and I can't wait to share them with all of you. So see you next year.